All right, welcome to our 5 o'clock session featuring Deven Kane speaking on Little Louie, how a piece of small change sparked a fashion craze and international scam. Deven is the second vice president of Chicago Coin Club, also on the board, and thanks to Deven for presenting today. So Deven, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Len. And hello, everybody. Glad you can join us. This is a very interesting and unusual topic, and it's one of these weird rabbit holes that somehow manages to suck my interest. It's a very fun collecting area as well. So one of the things that when you follow coins is you see something and you're like, that looks interesting. What is that? And then you start looking behind the history and the substance of what exactly this coin is, and you find there's a much deeper history behind this than just this little piece of metal. So about 10 to 12 years ago, I was just browsing eBay. I saw an acquaintance of mine. He was on eBay back then, and he had put up not this particular coin, but a coin of this type on for sale. And it was quite interesting. It was a very well struck coin. And what struck me was it was a coin issued in the name of the wife of the ruler. Now, this is something that happened all the time in Greco-Roman times, particularly the Roman emperors up in the 5th century did it all the time, but the empress was on the coin all by herself. But this is very unusual later on. You don't typically see the spouse showing up on coinage. And then there were a couple of other fun little things too. This is a coin issued by a Spinola in Italy, and more on Spinolas later. But if you look at the reverse, the coat of arms has the fleur-de-lis, which is the French coat of arms. And it's also sitting up in the crown. And so I was curious as to why exactly how does this coin get these motifs? It's a coin in Italy, it's an unknown woman. Who is she? And what are these why is this imitating, why does it have the French coat of arms on it? Now, before we get ahead, there's a question of denomination. So this coin was listed as a Luigino. And sometimes you will see it classified as 1/12 of an ecu or 5 sols. And back in the day, in the Middle Ages, denominations can get very, very, very confusing. It can be because we don't always know what the denominations were. But in this case, it took some digging, and one of the speakers at our coin club, he did a great talk about Carolingian coinage, which helps sort of give the aha moment. Oh, this is what they're talking about. So after the fall of the Roman Empire, the Merovingians, their coinage is not as well studied. It was a little chaotic without much royal control. But then Charlemagne, after the Carolingian dynasty started, he redid the coinage. And while doing that, he basically created a number of currencies that were there just as books of account. So while the actual coin issued was the denier, he sort of tariffed it in terms of pounds. So these were like accounting entries. So there was never a coin for a Carolingian pound, but as a book of account, it was listed as 1 Carolingian pound is 20 solidi. And this as a weight marker continued even after the fall of the Carolingians. And French feudal coinage is a bit of a mess because royal control is very weak. And you started having a couple of different weight standards. There was the Parisian standard, which was the livre Parisis, and then there was the livre tournois, which was the more common standard. And they still use the Carolingian weight standard. 1 livre tournois is 20 sous. Sous was the equivalent of the solidi. Then you move closer to the time period of this stock. You get King Louis XIII, the second king of the Bourbon dynasty. And what is happening now is European coinage is changing. Spain, starting up earlier in the century because of silver mines in Tyrol and in what is now in Bohemia, large silver coinage is now making an appearance. And then Spain has just conquered Mexico and Peru. So there's all the silver coming in, and the Spanish piece of 8, the 8 reales, or what we call the Spanish dollar, is becoming the big international trade currency. So in 1641, Louis XIII issued a gold and a new silver coin. We don't care about the gold for purposes of this talk. The silver was called the Louis d'Argent, and about 24.93 fine silver, and was tariffed equivalent to the Spanish dollar. Now, here's where the numbering comes in. The Louis d'Argent is also called an écu, the coin, and it was tariffed at 3 livres tournois, so 3 of the old pounds of the old denomination. So that made it 60 sol. So this particular denomination is 1/12 of an écu based on weight, which will be classified as 5 sols. And that is where the denomination description comes in. While I was looking it up, there are probably a couple of other books out it. The one I saw most listed was these 2 books by Maurice Camarano. There's one from 1980, and there's a more recent book, that's the one on the right. I couldn't get my hands on that one, but I was able to track down the first one. Now the books are in French and Italian, which is tough, but as Harlan Burke once told me, at least the coins are in English. So it's easy to follow based on issuer and denominations and stuff, what's going on. You may not be able to read some of the text, but it's still a good book to follow. So let's get back to the hero of our talk, the Luigino, otherwise known as the Little Louis. So the 1/12 of the écu is because Louis XIII, when he issued his particular coin, the écu, he also created the fractional denominations. And this is what a 1/12 of an écu looks like. And it has his portrait on it, has his name, Louis XIII, King of France and Navarre. Why Navarre? Because Henry IV, his father, was King of Navarre before he became King of France. So the Bourbons, until the Revolution and during the Bourbon restorations, called themselves King of France and Navarre. And now if you look at the reverse, it looks very similar, not exactly the same as the first coin I showed you. The crown is a bit different, but you see the fleur-de-lis, and you see the fleur-de-lis in the crown itself. So this is literally the first Luigino. But before we get to that, we get to an actual Little Louis, because Louis XIII died in 1643, and his son, who became Louis XIV, was only 4 years old. Louis XIV reigned a very, very long time. He reigned for 72 years. He didn't die till 1750. But he was a child when he first became king. And as a result, his portraits on the coins when he was younger have a childish bust of the king. And this is the coin, the Luigino, the Little Louis, that is sort of going to drive why the first coin got issued. And I'll get to that. But again, this is the coin, same style of his father. It has a laureate bust of the king, not crowned. It's almost in the style of a Roman emperor. Like you look at the way he is, the clothes and stuff. It's an antique style. And the reverse again has the French coat of arms, the French crown, and the traditional French legends on it. Now Louis, of course, did grow up. So the later coins obviously have his more mature image. This is from 1662. So this is about 20 years after he became king. So he's almost 23, 25 by then. And pay attention to that nose, because if you notice, it looks similar to the nose on the coin of the first coin I showed you. The Habsburgs, the big rivals of the Bourbons at the time, had their jaw. The Bourbons had their nose. Played an important part in their history. So again, these are the French coins that were issued, but why does this cause an international craze? So we're going to take a bit digression, and we are going to head east into the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman Empire at the time basically extended all the way from, it included Hungary, and it went all the way through Egypt, Iraq, and all the way down to the borders of Morocco. So it was like the old Eastern Roman Empire with the addition of Hungary, which is never really part of the Roman Empire. Ottoman coinage is quite interesting because the silver coinage of the time, the acha, is possibly one of the ugliest coins you'll ever see. They're flat, they're tiny, they're horribly struck, they're almost half, sometimes they're off the flan, and they're a tiny little silver coin. The Acha by this time, Murad III, was the grandson of Suleiman the Magnificent, and this is the period where the Ottoman Empire is still very, very strong, but as we know from history, this is the period of its decline. It was not obvious to the people next to them because they still packed a big punch, but this is the time when the emperors are not leading their armies out on campaign, they're sitting in the harem, they're controlled by the grand viziers or their mothers, and it's in decline. And Murad's big issue was he started debasing the currency because they were running into financial difficulty. And one of the problems that you're facing now is also there's all this silver coming in from the West, and it's causing all sorts of economic troubles everywhere. And the Ottomans not having access to their own silver sources, again, they're not expanding anymore. It's something the Romans in the 3rd century ran into. They debased their currency. And this had consequences. Now, before I go into what these consequences were, let me mention the big Ottoman gold coin of the time, because that plays a role in this story as well. So Mehmed II, the Sultan who conquered Constantinople, he issued a gold coin called the Sultani. And this was the big prominent, the Sultani comes under various names. I think it's also called the Altun and other stuff. And the Sultani is the big Ottoman gold coin of the time. And if you notice, this coin also has holes in it. And that will be a prominent part of this particular story as well. So now what's happening is, as I mentioned, the Acha has been debased and the Ottoman Empire is facing a huge crisis in silver coinage, particularly at the lower and mid-level values. Ibrahim was quite a fascinating character. He was the last surviving heir of the House of Osman. His brother Murad IV, one of the last competent emperors, though very violent, almost killed him. But because Murad had no sons, his mother was able to convince Murad not to kill Ibrahim. Ibrahim was frankly insane, and after 8 years, they deposed him and his mother authorized his execution. And Mehmed IV became the successor. But again, with all this chaos and confusion that's going on, you have a lot of issues with Ottoman finances. And by the time of Mehmed IV, the Acha I mentioned is almost not being produced. Nobody really cared about it. And the Ottomans had bigger denominations of silver. They were not being minted enough to make a difference. And it is fine if this was a demonetized economy, but the Near East was one of the most monetized economies for like almost 2,000 years now. And this was a problem. So you need the silver to come in from somewhere. And now by now you have the Spanish pieces of 8, you have the Dutch lion dollars, the Newman dollars, which helped give us the name for our own American dollar. And those are good for the bigger transactions, but you need something for small change because you can't do every transaction with that amount. And here come the French. The Louis Gino, the 1/12th écu that was issued in France by Louis XIV and the 13th, the French merchants started bringing this coin into the Ottoman Empire. Now this became very, very, very popular. And this is where the problem starts. It was one of the most important pieces of currencies in the Ottoman Empire, and it was valued locally at 1/8 of a Spanish piece of 8 and was known as a timin, which means an eighth. And this is where you get an arbitrage opportunity because the actual écu is 1/12 of a Spanish piece of 8. So the purchasing power in the Ottoman Empire is higher. So you have a huge opportunity and higher profit margin for French merchants. And so you suddenly have this big outflow of Louis Gino going into the Ottoman Empire. Now, before I get to the next part of the story, I'm digressing back to the Kingdom of France. As I mentioned, Henry IV of France was the father of Louis XIII. He had 2 sons, Louis and a younger son called Gaston, who was Duke of Orleans. Gaston was a giant pain in the backside for his brother, could not be trusted, ended up in exile a few times. but he married twice, and the first marriage was to a very, very rich heiress, Marie de Bourbon, Duchess of Montpensier. And from that marriage, they had one daughter, Anne-Marie Louise d'Orléans, Duchess de Montpensier, who was called the Grand Mademoiselle. Gaston, as the younger brother of the king, received the title Monsieur. Now, why is Anne-Marie Louise d'Orléans important? Because among her various titles, she was the princess of this town called Dombes. And the little principality had the authority to issue coins. And again, if you remember the first coin, you will see some similarities on this particular coin. It has the portrait of the princess. And if you look at the reverse, you have the 3 fleur-de-lis because she was a princess of the House of Bourbon, but the crown is different because she is not the king and she's not the queen. So it is almost like a lower princely crown. And then in heraldry, when you were from the collateral branches, you see this, if you look at just above the little, the 3 fleur-de-lis, you see this horizontal bar, which sort of denotes you're from a collateral line, that you're not from the main royal house. So you have these little marks over here. And so why does this coin become important? So you already had the Luigino getting into the Ottoman Empire because it was really, really needed for a currency. But if you notice, the gold coin I showed you had a hole in it. And it was very common in the Islamic world because they followed the coin slant type of the Sassanids, which were thin and flat. So it was very easy to hold the coins and wear them as jewelry, either on a chain or just attach them as buttons or adornments to clothes. Now, it was often done because the traditional Islamic coins have the kalima, so it could, the Islamic profession of faith about, there being only one God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. So you could have it like almost like a religious token, as if you're carrying it. But the Sultani was different in that it didn't actually have any such of the verbiage, but you could still, the shiny, it was gold. So a lot of people used to use it as buttons on their outfits. Now, gold is expensive. You have to be really, really rich to waste a gold coin as something to attach to your turban or your coat or something. And women wanted something similar, and here's where the Luigino comes in. The coat of arms was looked at as good luck. It was a smaller silver coin, so you didn't have to be filthy rich to afford it. And by this time, because of the demand of the silver coins, the Dombes coins were coming in. So that was preferred as well because you had a woman on it. And as I said, the coat of arms were also looked at as it was good luck. And now what happens is in the 1640s to like 1668, the Turks were involved in like a 20 years, it literally lasted 20 years, a siege in Crete against the Venetians. And they had this big Turkish army camped out in Crete for this particular war. And the soldiers knew that everybody wants this coin, so they insisted on this particular coin being paid in this coin. So the demand has gone crazy. So you have a few things here. You have a crazy demand. It's needed for the economy. It's needed for a fashion craze. And you have this arbitrage opportunity because they're valuing it at significantly more than the actual melt value is back in France. So when you have this opportunity, what's going to happen? You're going to have a scam. So Jean Chardin was a chevalier who traveled all over the East, all the way to Persia, and he had a bunch of books about his travels where he issued his observations. And in his travels, and he was a contemporary traveler, he noted about how this trade became so unfair. And notice he calls it the Phi Sol. This is why I went into the talk of denominations. He called it the Luigino or 1/12 Ecu, but it's also a Phi Sol. And he talks about how the valuation of the Timnin started changing. All Turkey was filled with it. We never saw another coin again because the French imported it. And they were not satisfied with the great profit they made, so they wanted to make more. So well, you have this opportunity, and you're going to see a bunch of these little princes are going to start issuing these coins, and then they are going to start cheating people because they're going to start debasing the coin. You're already getting the arbitrage opportunity. Why can't you get a little more? And here's where the thing becomes interesting is they used nobles who had the right to issue coins. So if I'm a forger, if I'm a counterfeiter, and back in the day, I was caught counterfeiting, forging coins, I'm in big trouble. But these are official issues issued by somebody who has the right to issue these coins. What are you going to do to me? It's a legal coin. I didn't take part in it. There's no crime here. It's a debased coin issued by somebody who has the right to debase this coin. And this is where the scam gets very creative. Now, not everybody was comfortable with this because these issuers knew that what they were doing was shady. And so some of them went and asked for divine guidance. And so one of the theologians basically came up with caveat emptor. The fault lay with those who did not carry out the assay to evaluate the quality of the coins. And particularly since they're using this as ornaments, all fine. And another princess, Violante Lomellini Doria, she talked to like 12 experts and decided conveniently to pick the 3, said, it's fine. Now we will get back to Avignon and Lorino, who also issued these coins, and we don't know how they justified it, but they justified it. So I'm going to walk through next the various variety of the coins. There are so many varieties of this. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but I want to highlight basically the main, I think almost all the issuers of these coins. So these come in 2 particular types. The first one, as I said, there's the official issue of Louis XIII and 14th. And then there is the one of Louis XIV's cousin, the Princess of Dom. And because the female head was popular, a bunch of them issued heads imitating her. So I will first go through those, and then you will see some which then people stuck their own mugs on the coin. So this was the coin I showed you first. And so who's this person? And this sort of explains what was happening in this coin as to why this unknown woman is showing up on the coin and issuing a coin with the French coat of arms on it. Now, if you look at the horizontal bar on the reverse, it's a little different. They didn't copy it exactly. But the portrait is very similar to the Princess of Dom. Tasserolo is basically possibly the most common version of these coins you will get. And it's fairly cheap. You can get most of these, the Tasserolo, and there is a couple of others. You can get them for under $60, all around there. But they're the most common one of these. There are some that will be there. They almost never show up. You will find it very hard to find them. But as I said, she's probably one of the most common things. Now I mentioned the Spinola. You are going to find some common names show up. The name Spinola is going to show up a lot. The name Doria is going to show up a lot. And why these things? Because the Republic of Genoa had a bunch of noble families who owned these little principalities next to it, and particularly the house of Spinola, Doria, and then a former Genoese noble family who's still a reigning sovereign house today, which will come up shortly. They all took advantage of this. Genoa, of course, being very big in trade in the East, made a natural sense for them to do it. The Genoese currency by now had declined. It was not as common as the Venetian ducat, so they were more than happy to jump on this as a trade opportunity. But you'll see a lot of these are issued, not all. You'll see some reasonably sized states show up in northern Italy, but most of these are coming from like north and northwestern Italy, and a lot of these are around Genoa. So this is Tasserolo. This is, again, here's another Spinola, but it's by the mint of Arcata. This is scarcer, it doesn't show up as often. But again, the head is generally the same. You can see what the inspiration is. The reverse is fairly similar, but you look at the crown, it's sort of almost turned into a 3-leaf clover rather than a fleur-de-lis. And you will see variations from the original. A lot of these have different legends and types, but you will see variations in what they do to the shield and the reverse. I mentioned another former Genoese noble house. that was the noble house of Grimaldi, which is still the sovereign ruling house of Monaco. Monaco is going to show up a couple of times over here. This is a coin issued by Louis I Grimaldi, Prince of Monaco, but he actually stuck it with the Dombes head on it. He will issue another coin with his own. Two princes of Monaco will have coins with their faces on it, but Louis also stuck one with this, and there are a lot of legend varieties for this particular type. Loano is interesting because Loano has two particular portrait types. You have this slightly, and by the way, you see a Violante Doria. I think this is the one I mentioned who went to the theologians and took the people who gave her the best advice. This one is a slightly more lumpy looking portrait. What I find fascinating, Monaco, I just want to, sorry, jumping back. Monaco, you notice the shield, it's very like the French coat of arms, but he's a ruling house, so he doesn't have that bar taken out. Jumping back, Loano, you look at the coat of arms, they almost look like chickens, griffins. I don't know what they have done to the fleur-de-lis, some sort of bird. And as the Knights of Ni would say, you have replaced the fleur-de-lis at the top with some sort of shrubbery. It's quite fascinating what they have done with the shield. But the portrait is a little different. It's a slightly lumpy looking, the prominent Bourbon nose is gone, but it's using that portrait. But she also has one where she copies the Princess of Dombes' head. And the reverse, again, it's quite fascinating to see the chicken heads or like the burning bush. I don't know what they've put in the top reverse over there. Fosse di Novo is probably the second most common one you will see after Tasserolo. And again, it's fairly affordable typically. The Malaspinas, again, it's a very prominent northern Italian house. I don't think they were, I forget they ruled Rimini. There are a bunch of these Italian noble houses that ruled different cities. And the Malaspinas were one of those that were more prominent 200 years before and were in decline at this point. She does have the fleur-de-lis on the reverse. And she has, again, the bar and stuff like that. But again, this is, after Tasserolo, this probably shows up the most common. And this is a slightly more different portrait of hers, probably not showing up. It's a more anonymous one. It doesn't actually, not sure how they specifically identified the Fosse di Novo, but it doesn't actually have her name on it. Now, this is a very, very rare one. You almost never see it. There are very few examples on PC Search and Campi. It has the Principal Julia, Princess of Campi, her legend and name on it. You're still using the French fleur-de-lis. The next one is interesting. So Malta was the Knights of St. John. They were in the east after the fall of the Outremer, the Christian states in the east. They held on to Rhodes until Suleiman the Magnificent defeated them in 1524, at which point they ended up in Malta. And they held off a Turkish siege in the 1560s. And the honorable knights decided, hey, let's get in on this too. And they issued these coins too. Again, this is a fairly rare type, doesn't show up very often. It's the reverse. It's always fascinating to see what they do with the fleur-de-lis over here. It's turned into almost a three clubs on a stack of cards, and then again the crown has changed. Consolello shows up probably less than Fosse di Novo and Tasserolo. It shows up every so often. Again, the coat of arms has been switched up a little bit, and it's not exactly the fleur-de-lis. There's like a gap between the little leaves, but it's similar. Torrigilla, another one. This one's interesting because you sort of have two pointy fleur-de-lis, but they almost like have a griffin for the third one. So it's interesting to track, and I think the Camerano book actually does track all these by the shield reverses. So to track what changes they make, I don't know what the bottom is supposed to be. Again, this is also issued by Violante Doria Lomellini. It's just a different city. Now, some of these princes had different mints that they could issue these coins from. So you will see several of these names show up in a different city. Now, this is an interesting one. I was able to find a picture online, and it was not pictured in the 1980 Camerano. I don't have the book from 2 years ago, so maybe it's pictured there, but it's basically might be a unique version, at least when it was listed in the Gaduri auction. So as I said, some of these are very, very rare, and at the end of the talk, you'll find out why exactly they're very, very rare. And Mesorano, if you ever get one of these, awesome. You have Lucca, Republic of Lucca. Again, it's following the Dombe's head, and this is actually more faithful to the fleur-de-lis. So, and then you have some, at least back in 1980, they're not entirely, because the legends sort of change and you don't identify the city, they're not entirely identified which city issued this. But this is again issued by, issued in Italy somewhere for trade in the Levant. So these are the ones that copy the Dombe's head. And then you have an interesting cast of characters who issued coins with their own portrait on them. In the Chevalier Travels book, he mentioned the Principality of Orange. And so this is the Principality of Orange. William Henry of Nassau, Prince of Orange. Orange is, I believe, a small little principality in the south, closer to Provence. The portrait is very similar to that of Louis XIV. He was 15 at the time of the issue, but it looks, a bust is very similar to that of Louis XIV. Now, who was William Henry of Nassau? So when the Dutch revolted against the Spanish in the 1580s, their leader was William of Orange, who happened to, because of the death of his cousin, inherit the Principality of Orange, which gave him an out because he was a sovereign prince in his own right, therefore could not be hanged for treason. So his house basically were the stadholders of Holland. The Dutch, the United Provinces had 7 provinces out of the 17 that originally revolted. And he was stadholder, basically the chief executive military officer of 5 of them. Eventually his grandson, William II was stadholder, but he died in 1650, leaving behind a posthumous son, William Henry, who was still Prince of Orange, but the Dutch went into a stadholderless phase where they abolished the office. But in 1672, William Henry would come back with a roar. In the year of disaster, he would sort of save the Dutch Republic. And we know him because in 1688, he invaded England and became King William III it wasn't the United Kingdom at the time, of England, Scotland, and Ireland, along with his wife, Mary II. William Henry was the grandson of King Charles I, so he's already in line to the throne. He married his first cousin, Mary. They ruled as joint monarchs. And we have a college in Virginia called the College of William and Mary, named after him. So at this point, his advisors decided, why not join the party? And the interesting thing with these is, if you look at the reverse, because you have their own ruler on it, they're not messing around with the fleur-de-lis. They're putting their own coat of arms on it. And so you won't see as many variants with the fleur-de-lis over here. I mentioned Avignon. So Avignon was sort of given to the popes. It's in, I think, in Provence. It had been handed over to the popes in the early Middle Ages, and the popes had ended up in Avignon for about a century for so-called Avignon captivity, when they couldn't basically stay safe in Rome. So it still remained a papal possession until the French Revolution, when the Republic took it over. And the papal legate in Avignon, Cardinal Flavio Gigi, he decided to join the party. And so he started issuing these coins. And our friends in the papacy were, and this is something they repeated in the 19th century, they were only too happy to debase their particular coinage. And you have the coat of arms here. So there are 2 types of Avignon coins. One has the cardinal legate, and then you have Pope Innocent XII, whose actual portrait, I believe, does show up on the coin, of the papal coin in Avignon. And at the reverse, you have the name of the legate. It's issued by his legate, but I believe that is actually the Pope on it. So that is quite interesting for that one. The next one is, again, super rare, but it's one of the coolest ones of this variety. Republic of Genoa, as I mentioned, had a bunch of their noblemen who didn't take authority, who got into the act. But Genoa issued their own version of this. It's a super rare version, almost never shows up. But it's a very cool they have a coat of arms with griffins, but I love the almost Janiform heads of a male and female head facing left and right. Janus, I believe, was the Roman god of war, like war and peace, and you have a lot of Roman coins with like two heads facing opposite directions. This may be the first Janiform head issued since the fall of the Roman Empire. I can't think of any other ones. It's a super coin. It's a pretty cool coin. It, again, almost never shows up. This is issued again by a collateral branch of the French royal house. Occasionally, a lot of French princes had their own little principalities across the border. Henry d'Orléans, Longueville, he basically, I think either him or his son may have been married to a Bourbon princess, the sister of the Prince de Condé. But again, you look at the coat of arms, because it's partially descended from the French royal house, you see the fleur-de-lis, but that is his actual coat of arms. He's not imitating the French coat of arms. But because following the rules of heraldry, you sort of split up whatever coat of arms you get from both sides of your family. So that is what he has done. Did that little bar on the top to call him as a collateral relative of the House of France. Again, this is a fairly rare variety. Now I'm going to have a couple of these show up that are even rarer because I could not find a picture that had gone on sale. It is actually pictured in Camerino, but I was trying to find pictures of stuff that was actually on sale because to see like, hey, what are the odds of you ever actually, if you look for them, of finding one. The Principality of Modena is an interesting house. It's ruled by the House of Este, and they issued these. We know they issued these, but again, super rare. I've not seen this. I looked in a bunch of places. I didn't see one that came for sale. The House of Este is quite fascinating. Francesco di Este was interesting because his sister, Mary of Modena, was the wife of James, Duke of York, who became James II of England, and her giving birth to a son precipitated the Glorious Revolution. A lot of these people are interrelated. The House of Este itself is interesting because the senior house of Este is moved to Germany, where it's known as the House of Guelph or Guelph. Those of you who have read Italian history from the 1200s have heard the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. The Guelphs were the pro-papal party, the Ghibellines, based on the castle of Wiblingen, were the pro-Hohenstaufen and later imperial party. How is the House of Guelph important? They were briefly Dukes of Bavaria and then Dukes of Brunswick, and eventually a member of the House of Guelph became King George I of the United Kingdom. And the House of Guelph technically ruled England until the death of Victoria. They also produced a very unfortunate emperor of Russia, Ivan VI, and also one Holy Roman Emperor, Otto IV. And it's a house we probably have not heard of. Livorno fell in Tuscany. The Grand Duchy of Tuscany at this point was ruled by the Medici. If you've almost certainly heard of the Medici from a bunch of TV shows, there's one on Netflix right now. The main house of the Medici was founded by Cosimo de' Medici, and his grandson Lorenzo the Magnificent is famous. But that line died out in 1537, after which descended from Cosimo de' Medici's brother, a Medici also called Cosimo, was made Grand Duke of Tuscany. And the Medici ruled in Florence until 1737, until their main line died out, and then they were succeeded by the House of Habsburg-Lorraine. The Medici at this time were related to the French because Louis XIII's mother was Mary de' Medici, so he had Medici blood in his veins. I still don't know why they stuck I guess they were rulers of Florence. Sorry, I should know this. The Florentine coins of the Middle Ages use the florin, which had a similar fleur-de-lis. So this is probably why you're seeing the coat of arms over there, which looks very similar to the French. Fernando II was, I think he had a son and a grandson who ruled after him in Florence. So he was the last of the Medici to rule. So he issued this too, but it's his big chubby mug on there. I mentioned Luano, where the wife of the prince showed up on the coins. Now you have the prince himself with his bust on the coin. And again, this is the ones with the heads like chickens and the shrubbery. The reverse doesn't change, but you have the bust. It's again, this is a fairly rare coin, doesn't show up that often. Mantua is another rare one. I could not, like with the Modena, I could not find another one of these for sale. There's only one in the 1980 Camerino. Again, if you ever find one, more power to you. The House of Gonzaga, another one of these prominent Italian houses. It's interesting because they also controlled Montferrat, which for history buffs was ruled by a collateral branch of the House of Palaiologos, the last Byzantine imperial house, because Andronicus II's wife was a heiress of Montferrat, and his younger son eventually inherited Montferrat. The Gonzagas did not rule for much longer because the son of Charles II, Ferdinand Charles, was stripped of his possessions for picking the side of the French in the War of the Spanish Succession. And so their territories were divided by the Austrians and the House of Savoy. But again, they issued one of these two. I mentioned Monaco. There were two princes of Monaco who issued these coins. Honore II, with his mugshot and the coat of arms of Monaco, which I believe that's the current coat of arms and the flag of Monaco as well. And then Louis I, who had his more feminine face on the earlier coin, and now decides to put his own bust on it. You probably couldn't tell the difference based on the nose. Louis I actually has two choices. He has a bust facing right, and he also has a bust facing left. He has two different varieties of this coin. And as I said, the way they present this is a little different. This is an unusual one. I mentioned the United Provinces, but for some reason, again, this probably the Dutch decided to get involved in the trade, in the Eastern trade. These were issued in Zwolle in the United Provinces, and again, a very, very rare version. It has a bust similar to that of Louis XIV on it, but it has a reverse. There's a little busted on it. St. George slaying the dragon. So it's a very cool reverse. Again, very rare, almost never shows up. This one cracked me up when I saw who issued it, because this might be the very first Napoleon to ever show up on a coin. I mentioned Spinolas. This is yet another Spinola. I think I have one more Spinola coming up after this. Napoleon is Spinola. I guess he was Prince of Ronco, Lord of Ronco, whatever. It was a county held by the Genoese House Spinola. I said, as far as I can tell, this is the first Napoleon to get on a coin. And this is interesting because Corsica at this time was a Genoese possession. And it would remain a Genoese possession until 1768. And the next year, a young boy called Napoleone Bonaparte was born in Corsica. His father was from a Tuscan noble family. His mother was from a minor Genoese noble family. And if the French annexation of Corsica had not happened, young Napoleon Bonaparte would almost certainly have not ended up in France to serve in the French army. History could have been very, very different. Who knows what would have happened in the French Revolution after that. But this one just cracked me up. Again, very, very rare coin. Almost never shows up. And this is a very nice version of it. But it's also, he has a very nice 17th century mustache, almost like an English cavalier serving for Charles I. But again, a very rare version. Yet one more Spinola. Again, this is the only example on AC search. This is almost like a late 17th century bust with the wig and the Spinola coat of arms on the reverse. And I'm coming to the last two, I believe, of this, and then I will tell you why these coins are, some are rare and some are not. This one, again, it's a duchy. Again, I mentioned the Malaspinas, another one of these houses. You have Alberico II on it. One of these names that's inherited from the previous Lombard occupation of the north is almost Germanic sounding. Very rare version. A lot of the ones, I think the ones with the portraits, individual portraits outside of the Prince of Orange are fairly rare. Medici shows up every often, but a lot of the others are fairly rare. I kind of find this one cool. Saborga or Larino, the Abbot of Larino shows up. It's almost stereotypically you think of Friar Tuck when you see this portrait. I think at least that's my perception. But very rare coin. You have to wonder why they got involved in this, maybe to make a quick buck. But again, fairly rare coin. Pay attention to Saborga. It is going to make an unexpected appearance in the last slide of this talk. So what's happening now is the Turks are getting very, very, very pissed off. And at some point, they're realizing they've been had. And they have started complaining to the French, saying, hey, what the heck? These are your coins. These are your people bringing all these coins. And they started complaining. And then the French were getting irritated with this. So they started sending letters out to people. And so the first quote you have is Governor of Livorno to the Grand Duke Ferdinando di Medici, talking about how the French are showing up and coming to inspect stuff. And basically the French are trying to put pressure on everybody to stop sending anything other than official French issues to the East. And they wanted these to be assayed before they head out to the East. So once you start producing bad silver, you have consequences because people will stop accepting these coins. And so the English, who had a trade surplus, at some point discovered that, hey, this is bad silver, and they refused to start accepting this coin. And by 1668, the war in Crete ended with the Turkish victory. The Turks did not need to pay as many soldiers, and hey, they were fine paying debased currency to the soldiers while they're still at war. Now they have to deal with the consequences of all this scrap currency in their own economy. So they started complaining to the French. Jean-Baptiste Colbert, the famous Controller General of Finances of France, started issuing a crackdown, and they put pressure on Genoa. Genoa, because its position was always susceptible to French pressure. So the Genoese started banning possession of these coins. And as I said, that's when they tried going to other fiefdoms, but the French are really cracking down. By 1686, they had banned the minting of these coins in Saburga. And then the big thing happens. It's sort of like how the tulip bubble burst in the Dutch Republic, how the Beanie Babies bubble burst in the United States. The fashion craze eventually moved on to new and different things. So you basically don't need these coins anymore. Pope Innocent the 12th appears to have minted the last of these coins out in Avignon. So now the Turks are stuck with a bunch of these coins. What do you do with it? So they finally assayed these coins. The ones that were genuine, or they identified as genuine, they allowed them to stay in circulation. They were marked with Nad Sahi, genuine currency, and with sometimes with the date 80, the Islamic year 1080, so that's 1699 of the Common Era. But again, I'm not sure why this coin was listed for Mehmed IV, because Mehmed IV was deposed and strangled by 1688. So, but you have these, you do see these show up so often, every so often with the Turkish countermark. But this is the end of this. What happened to the rest of the coinage? Eventually, I suppose they were just withdrawn and melted down. And that is why some of these are so rare. Coinage that caused like an economic crisis. There aren't as many of these out there, especially for some of these other issues as you would think. So my guess is a lot of these were melted down because they could not use them in commerce and they didn't want them to circulate. And so they were probably reissued into Turkish coins once they were melted down. But this is a cool postscript to this particular coin because you still get the countermark. So, you know, hey, this was still good coinage. And the Turks are willing to accept it as legal tender after they started banning it. So to close out, I have a fun little postscript for these coins. The Luigino still exists today. You have all these little fictional microstates, pseudo-states out there that issue currency of their own. None of it is obviously legal tender, but there is a town in Italy that calls itself the Principality of Saburga. And they decided we are going to issue our own Luigino. And it's not official currency, but they have pegged it at one Luigino to $6. So that would make it the most valuable individual monetary currency unit in the world. They don't have the Friar Tucky Abbot on there. You look at the date, they do have the 1666 date on it, so they know the history of this coin as to why it was issued, but they do have an abbot sitting on it. Saburga has an election every 5 years, so they elect a prince of Saburga. And so this is issued by so-called Prince Giorgio I. I believe there has been a princess of Saburga as well. It's one of these cool little weird collecting themes for coin collectors. None of this is obviously legal tender, but hey, if you want a modern Luigino, it still exists, and presumably it's decent silver. So that's it for me. It's a fun story. how you get a coin, you get an arbitrage opportunity, it becomes a fashion craze, and then people just go nuts.
All right, thanks a lot, Devin. We will open it up for questions. So just enter those in the chat there. And as they come in, I will transmit them to Devin. Any questions out there?
Wow.
Don't see
That's the
anything coming through. Okay, we'll give everyone a last chance here. Okay, all right, I think that's going to be it. Well, thank you, Devin, for presenting. We do have additional sessions tomorrow, so hope to see people there. Oh, we have one.
Actually, there's one.
A couple of questions. What did Turkey do with all the coins?
As I said, my guess is they were basically probably melted down, because eventually, what are you going to do with it? You can't allow this to remain in circulation. So my guess is they were basically eventually melted down, because once you have all this forgery in there.
Yeah, and melting and recoining happened all the time. That's not unusual at all. Something you had to do to restore the faith in the coinage. Next comment, the counterstamp did not seem to match the text quoted.
I will defer to Steve Album's expertise on it, because this was one of his listings.
Okay.
But I will also say, with just looking at the countermark, it's this, and as I said, if you search on Steve Album's on AC Searches listings, you will find this particular coin with Nat Sahi. Sometimes with Islamic coins, it is, the calligraphy can be a little weird as well. But I will defer to Steve on this.
All right.
I don't know if that's a later countermark. Obviously, that does exist, particularly with the Maria Teresa Thalers, famously, and that one obviously has a lot of spurious later countermarks. So it is possible. People did have fun with this later.
Okay.
But I will defer to this particular example. I picked it from Steve Album, so I'm deferring to his expertise on that.
Sure. All right, then next question, would it be accurate to refer to the Luigi nose as a trade coin?
I think so. Even so, it's fascinating. It was brought in for trade, and then it became like a fashion accessory. And because it was a fashion accessory, as you saw, some of the princes justified forging it. So I think it originally did start out as a trade coin, then it became like a fashion accessory.
Sure.
Because the Turks did have a shortage of silver, and they did need that.
All right. Any other questions out there? Just enter them into the chat window. Okay. And we do have one additional presentation today. Leanne will be talking about the Ichibu, the gold bar money from Japan. That's coming up at 6:30 Eastern time. All right, I think that'll wrap it up for the Q&A. So Devin, thanks a lot, and we'll see everyone in the subsequent sessions.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.